Maximize your yields while spreading out your workload with the earliest maturing winter cereal. Visit kws.com/CA to see how our hybrid rye varieties can work for you. High yields, high quality, high value for your farm. KWS, seeding the future since 1856.
The Agronomist is brought to you by the Canola School, the Machinery Update, and RealAg Radio. Real Agriculture's RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily one-hour agricultural radio show broadcast across North America on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. Hosted by Sean Haney, the show airs weekdays at 4:30 Eastern across Canada and the U.S. and is rebroadcast at 7 a.m. Listen live on Rural Radio 147, check it out on realagriculture.com/radio, or download the podcast wherever you get your audio. Hey everyone, welcome to the Agronomists. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and we are in for such a treat with tonight's show. Before, though, I bring in our guests, who I have a feeling I'm going to have a very difficult time wrangling for our topic tonight. A quick reminder, if you collect those CEU credits, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists with an S. Let us know you took in the program. We'll get you those CEU credits. And hey, it is July 8th. We are in the thick of spray season, or about to be. And so why wouldn't we have an entire episode dedicated to the spray pass? And of course, if we are going to have this conversation, there are two people that must be involved. It is the dream team from Sprayers 101. I have with me tonight Jason Deveau. That's the emphasis on the right syllable. Omafa and Tom Wolf of Agrimetrix. Welcome here, Jason and Tom.
Hi, Lyndsey.
Great to be here.
Jason's going to send me a memo later that is not how you say the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food, and Agribusiness. Wait.
Yes. Well done. And I would send that memo, except I'm not sure if that is how we're supposed to say it yet.
You know what? Maybe we just established it now. Right here. Okay.
It was Oomfa.
Oomfa. For a very brief period, it was Oomfa. So, hey, we can have fun. Now, let's start with, and hello to Jason Deveau out in Manitoba. Finally sunny and warm, and this is definitely going to be part of our discussion tonight, is the conditions under which we are having to make some of these spray decisions, because that is a big part of this. Tom, I'll start with you. Just talking, the season that we have had so far, the conditions that farmers have been dealing with. What have you seen out in the field? You've already been to several field days. What are you seeing out there on the landscape?
Well, I think we all know that Manitoba's got more moisture than it actually wants, and it's very difficult for that reason. Alberta and Saskatchewan had something very unusual, though. They had rain this spring, so that's very welcome. Good emergence, generally speaking. Some fields unseeded because of that extra moisture, mostly in the northeast. And now we're seeing this front of hot, dry come in from BC this week, and we're already in the 30s there. So still some spraying to be done. The herbicide season, I think, is in the rearview mirror for the most part, but fungicide growth regulator season definitely is happening right now. So I think we do have to be mindful of those weather conditions that are governing us. We've seen interest, I think, in water quality. It continues. It's driven really by a really good effort by, for the most part, Winfield United. They have some strong marketing, and they make people aware. They have products, AMS-based products that address water quality, and they make people aware that they should test water, and they do. We're seeing some spot spray activity. John Deere is selling a surprisingly large number of See and Spray Selects. I did not anticipate such high numbers, but they are high. And so there's some issues there. We're talking about nozzling those. By and large, though, I think we've got a great growing season. So we're pretty happy.
Okay. Yeah. We already have a question come in, Tom, but we're not going to go there yet because we still have to talk to Jason. And remind me, I do have a couple questions about the See and Spray Select stuff. But I, too, am excited that we're talking water quality at some point in these general conversations because it is so important. Jason, we have had a interesting start to the Ontario season in that at least 2 weeks so far already I have melted into a puddle with extreme heat, extreme humidity. I cut off all my hair, you guys, because of the humidity. I was just so sick and tired of it. But we did not get control of our weeds early on. They are very large in some cases. Walk me through, sort of generally speaking, uh, where farmers are sort of sitting, where their heads are at, where agronomists' heads are at in the spray season that we've got in front of us now.
Well, I'm with Tom. Herbicide application, whether it's convenient or not, should be in the rearview mirror. And he and I were discussing what we might say during this call because I think everybody wants us to say, you've got weeds out there that are bigger than the crop at the moment. Here's how you get them. I'm sorry, there's no easy solution to this. How you get them is you maybe should have considered getting them with a fall application. Or sometimes the weather just does this to us. And now that we're facing this problem, there's no easy answer. I will commiserate with you about the heat. I'm sitting in my office right now where we haven't had air conditioning for 3 days. It is 28 degrees in my office, which is why I've grown this luxurious Santa beard. And don't ask if I'm wearing pants. It's that kind of hot and sweltering. I've done a lot of driving. I did something a little different this spring. I've harassed some sprayer applicators into letting me drive along with them in what I'm calling the drive along diaries. So I get a lot of one-on-one time with the operators and talk about what they do and how they do it. And it's been really enlightening for me to see how it works. And the planting pressure this year has just driven everyone bananas. The guys that are tilling out there can't till. The guys that want to plant couldn't plant. Then we couldn't get the herbicides on. And then, unfortunately, I mean, some guys are talking replant because suddenly it just all baked and nothing could emerge. It's a mess. I was driving in London region a couple of days ago and saw corn this high, and then in the next field, chest high.
Yeah. No one needed me for the knee high by 1st of July pictures where I give the advantage because my knees are so much closer to the ground. No one needed me. It looks, the corn that went in on time and in decent shape is beautiful.
It is.
It is chest high. But you're right. A field, 2 fields down from one beautiful field could be either a replant or, just emerging soybeans or corn that, yes, is only maybe 3 leaves. So it has definitely been a challenging situation. To both of you, yes, I apologize for how ugly the weeds look in some fields. Not everyone got their herbicide passes on, but you're right. We now have fungicide season, of course, squarely in our sights, and that is probably what we'll talk quite a bit about tonight. And actually, to kick that off, Ken's got a great question. Tom, we'll maybe go to you first. Talking about a pulse width modulation, right? PWM. Yes, I got it right, you guys. Talking about that system in fungicide in regards to whether I should turn it off. So does it offer a benefit? Leave it? What should you do?
Well, pulse width modulation is still useful. There's no reason to turn it off. There are some issues. There's one caveat, and that is there are some formulations of fungicides that can gum up the PWM valves. And so the best advice that we've received in talking to the manufacturers and with the manufacturers of the fungicide is to make sure that you have adequate water. A better, it's the soluble granule formulations. Those are the ones that cause this problem. And making sure that you go to a higher water volume really helps the PWM valves work better, and prevent this gumming up issue. Otherwise, there's no reason not to use PWM valves. You get turn compensation, you get better sectional control, you save some money there. You have the speed modulation. You can go faster or slower as conditions require without a pressure effect, which is very nice for consistency. So I don't see a real issue. I would just simply make that one caution with water volume I mentioned earlier.
When you say higher water volume, what I have learned that perhaps Ontario's base is a lot higher than, say, much of Western Canada's base water volume. So does that mean the higher label, like what would be recommended on the label for a particular product, or just if you normally go this water volume, you should bump that up? How do you make that call?
Yeah, the issue came to me from a manufacturer of the fungicide who actually said they noticed that their PWM complaints were centered in Western Canada, where the water volumes for fungicides are 10 to 15 gallons per acre. And they did not have the same issues in Ontario and further into the US, where fungicide volumes are 15 to 20. So it just simply had to be with the formulation needing more water to dissolve properly, and for the granules, the soluble granules, to properly dissolve and not create those issues.
Okay. So aim to that 15, maybe even higher, versus the 10 in that
Exactly.
situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If
Okay.
with PWM for sure. Yeah. I mean, there's
Yeah.
other reasons to do high volumes. The larger canopies always prefer higher volumes because there's more foliage to cover. You need more water to do it.
Okay. And that actually, certainly, whether we're talking about herbicides, fungicide, whatever it might be, spray efficacy, always a big question. And getting the most out of each pass and all the different ways we can do that is certainly on the topic tonight. Now, yes, Jason Vogt, you're right. Dry bean growers in Manitoba know all about water volume. I will give you tip of the hat to the dry bean growers. They know, but maybe not necessarily those that don't grow dry beans or outside that area. But you're right. They know all about water volumes. Jason, I'm curious because you work in orchards, etc. How does that work in orchards? Is that like, because I don't, like, my mind is blown when I see how they spray in orchards. So how does water volume play into that question? I'm curious.
We don't have enough time to deal with this. I will say on behalf of all my horticultural brethren that we have inherited a lot of garbage from field crop labels because you
Tom
want a
and I
frank
both.
conversation? Oh, gasp
Okay.
all you like, people.
Yeah.
Almost all of our labels are based on per area planted. So if you've got an acre of corn,
Oh.
with the exception of maybe how you set your drill, an acre of corn's an acre of corn. Actually, this year,
Right.
an acre of corn could be completely different from your neighbor's, but
That's
generally, an acre of corn's an
generally
acre of corn. An acre of apple trees,
not
forget
the
about it.
same.
You could have
Yeah.
several orders of magnitude difference. So how does a grower operate? The grower operates by applying two very loosey-goosey rules. Spray to the point of drip, which is a magical number, because if it drips, you're too far. So I don't know how you're getting up to it without going over. And two, spray until you have sufficient coverage, which, believe me, nobody has managed to define. So they end up falling back on what a lot of us do. Spray until it looks good. And, what we talk about, what you just spoke about with Tom, 10 gallons, 15, 20, 25, if I can coax you up that high, the more volume, the more droplets. The more droplets, the higher the odds of impacting on your target. So why are you out there if not to get the job done correctly? If you're skinning the cat and getting so close that you're risking damage or, a miss, then, why are you out there at all? And in horticulture, there is absolutely no margin for error. A filthy crop is an unsellable crop. So they are always happy to use more water. Just tell me how much, they say. And then you go to a field cropper and they slap you if you ask for 2 extra gallons.
Right. I hadn't really thought about the difference in an acre of, because an apple tree in year 5, let's say in year 10, is a completely different surface area that you're dealing with.
Even the
So,
rootstock and the variety and the row spacing, just that
yeah,
alone can mean
would make a
tremendous
huge difference.
differences. Yep.
Right. So, in another way, Tom, if we think about field crops, if we're looking at fungicide, having the conversation between, are we targeting leaf surface? Are we targeting a head? Are we
Good question.
targeting petals? How does what we're targeting play into either the water volume question or simply the entire pass of how we put all this together, nozzles, speed, the whole bit? How does that target play?
It's the first thing, Lyndsey. It's the first thing you have to understand. What is your target? So you have to actually understand everything before you even make a spray decision. You have to understand the disease. Where is it coming from? What parts of the plant does it infect? And then also you have to understand the fungicide. Is it a contact, a protective fungicide, or can you spray it when there's already some infection present? Those fungicides differ slightly in that regard. And then, of course, the translocation. Is there a chance of remobilization within the plant? And usually, the answer to that is no. A very limited chance in the fungicide world. So you do have to know where it's going and where it needs to be, and then you make a water volume and targeting decision based on that. So it's not just general fungicide work. I mean, the answer is usually because more foliage is present, and usually because the diseases are often from the bottom of the canopy upwards. Certainly cereal fungicides are like that, or diseases are like that. You do need more water, and so it is a bit of a question if you want to really simplify it, of just looking at the canopy and seeing how much foliage is there. And if there's a lot, and in many cases in Saskatchewan and Alberta this year, there is a lot more than usual, a lot more than the last 5 years, we should be bumping up our water volumes to make sure we get that coverage. And then the other thing really is do you the special case, I guess, is the fusarium. It's always kind of the exception to the rule. Fusarium has one target. It is the head. It is at the top of the canopy. You don't actually need a lot of water to target that head, but the odds, like Jason said, of hitting something just get greater the more water you do use. And so, it's always good practice. And I do think that if we look back on the last 10, 15 years in the spraying world, our sprayer tanks have gotten bigger, and the introduction of really efficient tendering systems has basically happened, which means there's no longer the real, disadvantage of using the high water volume. You can still be productive even with that demand. And now what that really means is you can do a better job without taking more time. So take advantage of it. I still get calls from people who say, hey, why do airplanes use 4 gallons and get away with it and it's good disease control, and why do we have to use 15? I get that question. I've had that question for 35 years.
Okay. So why, Tom? Why?
Tell us about 1
I wish I
gallon,
had a
Alan.
good answer for it by now. I don't. But the fact of the matter is that some instruments are limited in how much water they can deliver. And, we have accommodated them. We said, we know you can't do 10. We know you can't do 15. And we're going to see if we can get by with 4. And we're going to let you do it because it's important for the industry for that application to happen by air sometimes. That doesn't mean it's as good or better or worse. I'm not being a judge, but I think you get more insurance that it's going to be good the more water you do add. Even for aircraft, some aircraft want to do, they got long ferrying distances. They got a long list of things to do, right? How many days are they behind, right?
Yeah.
So they want to create those efficiencies by using less water, but more water is still better, even for them.
Are you telling me that you won't absolve these poor, inconvenienced people by just banning physics for a couple of minutes? You know what? Most people on the planet can't take 10 droplets and cover a whole acre, but for you,
We'll
can.
do it.
I give you my permission.
That's right. That's a great idea.
I don't know why you haven't just absolved them. You're the Pope of spraying. Just, it's all right.
Oh, we're going to
I'll
have
tell you
to
what, maybe we'll sign some kind of a waiver, of
Right.
responsibility,
I love
and
it.
then just say, do it and
You
get
can
back to me.
Tell
Do it
the
and get
disease
back to me.
doctor Tom Wolfe told me that I could spray with 3 gallons of acre. You better die because he said it was okay.
Yes.
You mentioned,
okay, so
what?
this is
Lyndsey.
Just 4. Well, and Ken says, I've always struggled to get them to use more water, but pretty sure the person that they uses less than 1.5. So Tom, if I'm hearing you right, because I'd like to just touch on this for a moment, is that, well, it is approved that an aircraft is going to use lower water volumes. That isn't because it does a better job. It's because it's an aerial application and they can only carry so much to and from fields and try and get it done in a day. Therefore, we are making a concession in effectiveness with the added water volume because of how it's being applied. Is that fair?
I think from a practical perspective, I think that's probably the root of it. But the PMRA is diligent in this regard, and they do want proof, efficacy data, that the lower water volumes do still work. And they do have that proof, and they will review that proof. I'm not privy to that, but they will review that proof prior to registering the aerial application. The same thing's happening to drones, right? I mean, we want to see if they're as good as ground or other aerial application methods before we say go for it. And so the onus is on that method of application to develop that data set, right, Jason?
Okay.
Thank you, Captain Segway. That was perfect.
Dun, dun, dun.
That was fantastic.
Okay, run away
Okay.
with it. Man.
I'm not. Do I have permission, Lyndsey? You should crack the whip.
You should. Producer Jay, if we had a whip sound,
You
I
don't
would
have a
use
whip
it now.
sound, do you,
We
Jason?
don't have a whip sound.
Oh, he's got everything else.
No whip
Okay.
sound
Yeah.
on file.
No
So,
whip sound.
I will
Okay, we'll
say-
work on that one. Go ahead.
I will say that the limit for aerial applications on our labels is 5 gallons an acre, by the way. So there is a bottom end on that. And not that I personally know anyone that's pushing that. It is supposed to be 5 because at some point, no matter how small a droplet you use and how you spread this around, which is, of course, risky, that product is formulated to do very specific things for your crop. And I mean, it's not just an active ingredient in that jug. There are humectants and stabilizers and spreaders and any number of things that help that product disperse in a spray tank. And when you put something that's hyper concentrated, for lack of a better term, and spray that from anything, when it lands on the plant, it's not going to behave as it would from, say, a field sprayer. So something that's fine at 15 gallons an acre may behave quite differently at 5, which does lead us quite nicely into drones. We are not allowed to spray pesticides from drones in Canada. I'm going to die saying that, at least for the next little while until we actually get a pesticide registered. No, it doesn't matter if it's your house. No, it doesn't matter if your mom said it was okay. It is illegal. If you're caught, it's $10,000. Who's going to catch you? I don't know. We can't be everywhere. But you're risking a lot, not just because we're trying to be restrictive. I say we in the good-natured federal sense, but because we just don't know how these things work consistently. And I know you think in the United States everyone's using them. They're not. And we're getting mixed results. Case in point, when we spray with drones, we actually don't know what our swath width is. And I can hear the roar in the background. I sprayed water-sensitive paper and I looked. Good. Now when the wind changes, or you fly a little higher, or you're a little lighter, or you use a different drone, or heaven forbid you actually spray a crop, that number is going to change. And by as much as, preliminary numbers, we're seeing a 20% difference for what you swath on the ground versus what you swath in a fairly modest crop like wheat. So how do we advise you to do the best, most efficient, and safest job when we're still trying to figure these things out?
So Jason, 20%, I mean, that's like buying a 120-foot sprayer and setting up your passes for 120 feet, but only covering 100 basically.
Hey man, it's even better than that. You're concentrating that product that you are spraying on a smaller area and not consistently. So you could be getting big hits and misses even within that restricted area. And anyone that saw some of the images last year, tar spot is a filthy, hideous thing, unless you're me, and then it turns the whole cornfield into water-sensitive paper. If you get a slightly smaller dose than what's permitted, you're going to see striping. Hit, miss, hit, miss, hit, miss. And I had lots of photos sent to me, and only a few of them were drones, and some of them were conventional aircraft, because the canopy itself is going to truncate the swath to some degree. And Tom and I are going to be looking at that this summer.
Okay. I love that you call the entire crop water-sensitive paper. That's ridiculous, but amazing. And I would like to point out, I would like to make this entirely clear. You have a license to do research on spraying by drone. That is why you can and why you were doing this, right?
Yeah, you get authorization from the PMRA, Health Canada, to do the work, and you jump through a bazillion hoops, and they ensure that everything is as safe as possible. Sometimes it means crop destruct, and sometimes it has to be the product is registered on the crop, but we have to follow a lot of rules to do that.
This is, and I knew this would come up, so I'm glad. And someone has said that, are we at risk of losing a technology before we even have it registered because of potentially misuse or rogue recommendations and uses, etc.? Because certainly there is a lot of discussion out there and perhaps even video out there of drones potentially being used to spray
with water.
with water. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. Let's be very clear here. We're not trying to, but at the same time, we are seeing on social media for sure examples of what spraying with a drone might look like. Let's assume it's water. Are we at risk potentially of being in very hot water before we even get this off the ground, Mr. Deveau?
I don't know. I mean, we've warned as advisors in the past that if you misuse pesticides and we find it where we're not supposed to find it, then if there's a product on the bubble for re-registration, you might lose it. And it's happened. I've never heard of an entire technology getting wiped off the map, aside from maybe an airfoil, and Tom can talk to that. But I think drones are a juggernaut. I mean, if I'm going to put on my crystal ball and guess, I don't think we can stop this. I don't think we should. I think they have a niche. I'm not sure what that is yet. I don't see them replacing a sprayer. I see them supplementing existing spraying technology. I don't see how we could possibly stop these from moving forward. We just have to be patient that we understand enough about them that people will be safe and that your crops will be protected before we set you loose, because they're stupid easy to fly. There's no obstacle to adoption here at all. Anyone can be a pilot, even a poor one, by pressing a few buttons. But that doesn't mean you're a spray applicator. You can lose respect for what it is you're applying because of the ease with which it's used. And I think that's the real risk, is it gets into the hands of people that don't appreciate the gravity of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I don't think there's any mood, from what I can tell, in the PMRA to stop this I guess this process of approving them. No, I don't think we're going to see that. But I'm concerned in general. I'm concerned about the image of ag. I mean, it's not just, are we legal, or are the regulators going to shut us down? We stopped talking about social license a long time ago, but I still think it's relevant, right? I mean, it's still relevant. What do people think of us as an industry, and how do we conduct ourselves? So I think it matters. Yeah.
I thought you're right. We did sort of, social license was everything for a while there, Tom, and now it's sort of dropped off. I was in one, and there are horrible screenshots from it, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, there are many more questions to come on this. We've got some great questions about nozzles as well. We're just going to quickly pause to say thank you to our sponsors, and then we're going to dive into the drift question, and then spraying under some challenging conditions as well. Producer Jay, if you would. Our sponsors for the Agronomists are the Machinery Update, RealAg Radio, and the Canola School. From pre-seeding, seeder setup checks, to pest ID, and advice on nutrient management decisions, to tips on determining swath timing, Real Agriculture's Canola School is a video series that tackles every facet of the canola growing season in an engaging and informative format. The Canola School is made possible through sponsorship by BASF Canada and InVigor Hybrid Canola. Learn more at canolaschool.com. All right, so there's a few things we need to tackle. When I originally had wanted to do this episode, it was actually 2 weeks ago, when we were in the midst of incredibly hot conditions. But the timing has worked out just fine, because here we are back to incredibly hot conditions, and now even also in the West. So, Tom, we have some science to back this up as to how we make our decisions in extreme heat as far as this spray pass. So how then does hot and dry conditions, how does that shape the decisions we need to make for the spray pass?
Yeah, I see it really as two things that we ought to consider. The first one is the life expectancy of a water droplet. Is it going to hit the target? And when it gets there, is there enough time for it to do its thing? And the second aspect is, if it does do its thing, has the plant been compromised by this hot and dry weather? And so I wanted to maybe just review that a little bit. And Jay, I think I've got a slide 1 that might show the familiar, I guess, delta T. So in this figure here, we have a depiction of delta T, which is also known as wet bulb depression. This is actually, I have to give credit to Australia. This concept originates in Australia. because a lot of their summer spraying is done under hot and dry conditions, and the life of the droplet was so short that they weren't getting performance. So they basically said, if the delta T, which is the difference between the wet bulb and a dry bulb, and an aspirated wet bulb and a dry bulb, in other words, the wet bulb is colder than the dry bulb because of the evaporation of water driven by this wet wick. If the wet bulb depression is greater than about 8 degrees Celsius, don't spray, because the droplets that are emitted by your sprayer may not reach the target before they evaporate. That was the situation. I went to Australia for the first time in 2006. At that time, the air induction tip had not yet really caught on that much, but they were still spraying with flat fan nozzles. They told me 30% of their spray volume was not making it to the target. It evaporated on the way when they were spraying under these summer conditions. So the delta T concept arose out of that. And if you look at it, it is actually fantastic. So what I've done here is I've got in this figure, if you look at the 30% RH line, which, we usually go by RH, right? We think our relative humidity is the way to do this. But if you look at the 30% RH line here, and let's take two different temperatures. Let's take a cool day, 15 degrees Celsius. So go across in the 30-degree RH on the left side, come in until you hit the third line, which is a 15 degrees Celsius, and you will see that you're in the yellow region, which is delta T between 6 and 8. And you are technically, according to the delta T, good to go. The evaporation pressure on that droplet is sufficiently low to go ahead. Now let's take exactly the same RH and go across to a 30-degree day. And we're now, well into the no spray, where the delta T is 12. And it's the same RH, but two completely different drying situations. That is why I love delta T. It measures the evaporation of the droplet. And let's go to the next slide, Jay, if we can. And we have some examples of just the speed of evaporation. So we have two curves here. We have a red line. The delta T is 7. It's acceptable. But look at how different it is from the delta T of 1.5. So time to evaporate in a log scale on the y-axis and droplet diameter. The large drops, this is seconds. The large drops will take, minutes to fully dry under either condition. But it's the small ones, under 200. They're dry in 10 seconds or less. And is that sufficient time for the pesticide to land? Is that sufficient time for the pesticide to make proper contact and to move into the plant before it dries? And uptake and absorption is driven by a wet deposit. It's much more efficient when that deposit is wet. So that's the efficacy part, or the droplet life part. If we go to the next slide, we have an example that I actually got in watching a Charles Getty's podcast, and he made me aware of this Wu et al. Paper from 2018, where they did the efficacy of glyphosate on kochia, and they did it under two different temperature conditions, not humidity conditions. So they grew kochia in cool environments, that's the blue line, and then they also did it under a much warmer condition, that's the red line. And you can see the efficacy of glyphosate is much lower under the hot conditions. And so, like, for example, you got a GR50 of probably, less than 50 or 25 grams, whereas the GR50 of the hot and dry is, close to 200 grams. So very significant. And the last slide I want to show here is the reason that they took. And that's that they measured uptake and translocation. And in the uptake slide, the next slide, Jay, in the uptake slide here, they showed that very clearly the hot and dry, the red line here, significantly lower uptake on the y-axis over time compared to the conditions where the plant was grown under cool conditions. So that is now the physiological response. Yeah.
Okay. So hang on, my camera's being silly. I have a question. So this is spraying under these conditions, or the kochia grew under different conditions?
The kochia was grown under those different conditions. Yeah.
Right.
So the kochia has acclimatized itself to a hot and dry environment, much more difficult to kill. I suspect that will also affect how the product is taken up. Whether it's
Right.
I
Yeah.
can't say for sure anymore whether it was also sprayed under hot and dry, but it would
Right.
typically be grown there, sprayed, and then returned to that environment after spraying. So the plant is saying, you know what? I don't like this weather. I'm not going to metabolize much. I'm not physiologically that active under the hot and dry. So that does matter. It is a
So
herbicide example, Lyndsey. It may not
yeah.
be as relevant for fungicides, but I think it's a bit of a lesson.
Mm-hmm. So we did nudge our friend Mike Cobra to join us this evening, and he could not, but he will be on an upcoming episode, and we can talk about this. So save your questions for him. But it is one of the things I wanted to touch on tonight is that very important, and we'll talk more about this, about how droplets act in different scenarios, so hot and dry conditions, etc. And I have in my head, Tom, as you're explaining this, I envision that spray cloud as we travel across the field, those tiny droplets, then those little ones, they may not hit anything before they evaporate. They may just evaporate and not even make contact potentially.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
fear, and that's actually the
Yeah.
experience we learned from talking to our neighbors in Australia about these
Yeah.
conditions. So
They
I think
would.
it's raised
Yeah.
awareness. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other part of this, and this is, I think, what this does show, is that the conditions under which crops grow, but also our weeds grow, potentially makes them harder to kill because weeds do adapt their growth characteristics, and they can actually put up more cuticle. They can actually, as you mentioned, Tom, want to take in and metabolize less. They try to conserve moisture, etc. They can become harder to kill under hot and dry conditions potentially. So
And
not only are you spraying in hot and dry, the plant may not actually be as easy to kill.
yeah, so we have a long tradition in agronomy research across Canada, in Ontario and East, as well as in the West, where our agronomists have repeatedly shown that early removal results in the largest yield, right? Clarence
And that's
Swanton's done a lot of work on the early removal, but he follows others that have done it as well, and it is absolutely irrefutable that early removal is good for the crop yield. But it's also easier to kill weeds when they're small, right?
yeah.
And Jason, with that wet spring you had in Ontario, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure a lot of people were thinking about maybe I should have done something in the fall, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Not sure what to add
So
there. Yes,
Well,
hindsight's always 2020.
well, okay. Yes, hindsight is, but Jason, this is one of my observations anyway, in that in watching, having grown up out west and being more familiar with that, and then moving to Ontario and getting to know the cropping systems here, I don't see a lot of fall weed control that happens. And is it potentially one of those parts of the season we could be leveraging to our advantage as far as the weed control cycle goes? Because I don't notice as much, and maybe it's just my area, but I don't seem to see as much fall weed control happen here.
if you look at
I can only
the
parrot.
Okay. Yeah, Jason, if you could,
Go
what
ahead,
would
Tom.
Mike
the
say?
You're the weed specialist. I would just be taking Mike's name in vain.
I guess the issue really is that we're seeing a tremendous amount of momentum in the US, where resistance is, of course, the issue, and where weed escapes of resistant weeds are much more painful than of susceptible weeds. Where they have learned the lesson and are really advocating for the residual pass, whether it's a fall or a spring pass, to give some time for that to act should post emergent control not be possible for some reason. And
Mm,
so, I guess it is a little bit of a question of the availability of products. We certainly don't have that many in the cereal world, but we do have them in the oilseed and pulse world. So that is a possibility there. And I think we're seeing, some of those actives that are basically, they were a mainstay of weed control in the 70s and 80s are coming back. We all know that. It makes sense. And I was just chatting with Jason on another topic earlier today, and I said, one of the things too that the residual pass gives you is when it is time for post-emergent spraying, which is inevitable in either case, I suppose. That post-emergent spray now might be a good candidate for spot spraying because it's not as blanketed, So
Right.
there's a couple of things to think about there.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me, I have a question about the See and Spray Select, Tom, spot spraying, etc. Catch me up. See and Spray Select, is that the green on brown, or is that the base level green on green? That's green on brown.
That's green on brown.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
And you said that you've been surprised by how many of these units are flying out the door. Why?
Yeah. Why?
You
Hey,
said it, so now I'm going to
That'll
ask.
teach you to
Why?
say something to Lyndsey.
Yeah.
What
Exactly.
is the reason?
Yeah, I thought we should be very excited that we've got green on brown systems heading out the door. Yes?
What I would say is this: read Malcolm Gladwell's first book, The Tipping Point. It
Yes.
explores this issue. It won't. It doesn't mention John Deere, but it does have. There a time comes when the world is ready for certain things and adopts them, and the same thing wasn't possible 10 years earlier for some reason or other. There's new awareness, new pressures, new priorities that come into play, new products as well, new marketing pushes, maybe the incentives. It's a complex world. But I'm personally very surprised how many See and Spray Selects we're seeing in the field in 2024 for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll let you off the hook on that one. Rob Miller, we all know him, and he's a frequenter of the show, and I appreciate Rob very much. He says, leave a check strip when you do fall weed control, and you will be a believer for life. Jason Deveau. For life. What say you? Would Mike agree? Jay?
Oh, 100%. I like when people leave test strips and didn't mean to. Those are the absolute best learning moments. We've seen so much amazing stuff happen with an accidental test strip. So I've always felt people should leave them.
Yeah.
And even non-residuals like glyphosate for fall annual weed control. I even just the good old 2,4-D dicamba for fall weed control at the rosette stage. Those are really night and day comparisons in the spring. And people who do that, there's less pressure, right? There's always this pressure in the spring to do pre-seed, for example, and it takes a lot of that pressure off.
Safer time of the year to use them too, as long as there's nothing around that you're going to zing. And we're in zing season right now.
Right now. Okay. Excellent segue, gentlemen.
Thank you.
In that it's like we planned this, but let's talk about drift. Now, with fungicide, I would like to state for the record, it is not a non-issue. Okay. I know that we think about fungicide potentially as being somewhat benign. And so this harkens back to our discussion about aerial spraying and drones. And the visuals of these things, right? Just because it's fungicide doesn't mean we don't want off-target movement. However, when we're talking about drift, we are, for the most part, we do not want to harm anything around our fields that are off target, right? We want to stay on target. So, Jason, when we're talking about reducing our drift, do I need something fancy, or are there some basic things I can do to reduce the spray drift risk?
Way to softball that right into me. Let's start with a new website that was developed by a number of organizations here in Ontario called bedriftaware.ca. So last year, actually the year before that, there was a grape grower who unfortunately suffered some 2,4-D damage. And the misconception, of course, is that 2,4-D doesn't drift as badly as, say, some of our dicamba products. And while its volatility is indeed less, that doesn't mean it isn't subject to physical drift like any other herbicide. And any horticultural crop that catches a whiff of that, you're not going to like it. So he'd had enough, obviously, who would tolerate that. And it led to CropLife, Grain Farmers of Ontario, a number of them, to come together and amass some literature they thought might be helpful for people. I mean, there's a lot of information about drift out there, and it can be a little intimidating. So bedriftaware.ca boils it down and breaks it down into questions. What causes drift? What can you do to stop drift? What if you suspect that you've been drifted on? Highly recommend people go check that out. A lot of Tom's articles are on there, in fact. Surprise, Tom. But drift in general, you wanted to know how to stop drift. Do you need fancy equipment? You do not. You need situational awareness. I mentioned earlier, I've been doing a lot of these sprayer drive-alongs with operators. And while the buddy seat is an absolute spina bifida murder kidney puncher, that easy ride seat looks pretty smooth. You don't know how fast you're driving. You don't know what the wind has done. It's pretty easy to zone out. Occasionally looking around, seeing what's around the sprayer, seeing when conditions change is a cue for you to make changes to how you're using your equipment. That could be going to a larger droplet by something as simple as a pressure change. If you have PWM, it's even easier again. Slowing down, dropping your boom. Just recognizing even which end of the field you're on and what's downwind means taking an active role as an operator can pay huge dividends. You don't need to run out and buy a lot of fancy equipment. Now, having said that, get yourself nozzles that do air induction, please, bigger droplets. And if you get into a pinch, have another set on there with a higher rate so that when you do slow down, you can still, produce a larger droplet at the right rate. I think I said that right. I always get it backwards. You don't need to spend a ton of money here. I've been hearing guys talking about running out and buying shrouds this time of year in a panic to get between crops. And I've done it in asparagus. I've used them in a number of crops. Red ball shrouds are pretty darn cool. But they're also kind of expensive and not necessarily something that you need or you have to invest in. There's a lot you can do just with what's on board. I'll bet you're getting towards adjuvants here, aren't you?
Well, Jason, there is a clip that we could play that is of a man you might know named Jason Deveau, with at the time Omafra, and he
Beardless
does
fellow, I believe.
a beardless fellow, yeah, great shorts, that talks about will a drift, what's it called, a drift adjuvant, something to reduce drift, as Jason Vogt says, Frank's red hot sauce, because that bleep works on everything. Is there, so Tom, I'll ask you, when we're talking about something to add to the tank to reduce drift, do we need, is that the first step, or is that like the third or fourth step to reducing drift?
Yeah, I always divide it into two parts. It's hardware and software, right? So hardware is always number one, right? Nozzle, right? Boom height, right? Speed, right? Water volume, all those hardware elements. But you do find yourself in the field sometimes and you're looking back and you see something that you can't handle and you haven't got the opportunity to change the hardware. You've done all the things you can do. That's where software comes in. The classic example in Western Canada, or maybe in the East as well, is Liberty. Liberty atomizes finer through the same nozzle than many other products. It has that kind of a formulation. And that's where these low drift adjuvants have found their place. Interlock, Valid, LI700 in some cases, which are sort of an oily adjuvant that suppresses the formation of small droplets. So the nice thing about them is actually that they produce small, they reduce small droplets without generating large droplets, which is the way that low pressure and larger and coarser sprays, larger low drift nozzles might do it. So there's actually a very surgical approach to these adjuvants. Now they're not as big a hammer as air induction nozzles, but I've seen evidence that they reduce driftable fines somewhere between 40% and 60%. That may not mean that they reduce drift that much, but certainly that driftable component is that much less. That's important.
Mm-hmm.
So
So
they have a place.
They have a place. They have a place, but not as a replacement for doing your due diligence of reducing drift overall.
I drove to Lethbridge a couple of weeks ago for a field day, and I stopped when I saw a tender truck filling up just as I entered the St. Mary's Water irrigation district there, just east of Lethbridge. And I stopped in and talked to him for a while, and I noticed that his tender trailer had a low drift adjuvant on it, lots of jugs, lots of boxes. And I said, "Would you do this to all of, like, you put it in general?" He says, "Yeah, I've added to everything." And I don't know if that's necessary, but there is an element of insurance, like a BMP.
Yep.
checklist. You add certain things, and you've at least covered that off.
And realistically, you could, I mean, as you've mentioned, different products perhaps are at bigger risk. And I would like to state for everyone's knowledge, Lethbridge, it's windy all the time. So maybe geography may play a role in that farmer's
It's
decision.
entirely possible. I still want to be a little bit more, economical about that. I mean, it's not a free product. It's no guarantee. The hardware still supersedes, and you could probably achieve the outcome that you need with hardware. But sometimes you just need that little bit extra help.
And they do work. So it's not, it shows that they work. So that's definitely something. Too many Jasons, so I'll call him Mr. Vote, says are oil-based drift reducers better than polymer-based reducers? So is there a difference?
Yeah, there's a big difference. The polymer ones are the earlier generation. So the polyacrylamide and polyvinyl polymers, and they're still around, had two main problems, or maybe three. The first one was mixability. It was really difficult to get them into solution without them creating a mess. So you had to add them really super slowly. The second one is they changed the pattern of the nozzle. So the pattern became, went from pretty wide, to pretty narrow.
Yeah, there you go.
I didn't know that. I knew they wouldn't mix. I didn't know they messed with the pattern.
Well, they messed with the pattern terribly. And and the third problem was because they were polymers, and the polymers were huge in size, like hundreds of thousands of kilodaltons. They were actually, you could actually, believe it or not, you could cut them with a knife. So when you put them, that's how big they were. If you put them through a pump, they sheared and got cut up by a pump into smaller fragments and lost their effectiveness. Now they have since made shear insensitive polymers, but they still mess with the pattern. They're not compatible really with our low drift nozzles because of that. And so I don't see them. I don't like them for that reason. The oil-based low drift adjuvants are much less, visceral. Like they don't have that, whoa, wow, look at that effect, but they do the job.
Okay. Can we just back up a moment? What did you measure them in again?
Kilodaltons, of course.
Kilodaltons, yeah. Isn't that
great band?
I saw this before. Kilodaltons of water right now.
Kilodaltons.
I believe. Look, I'm bluffing my way through biochemistry. Don't you remember biochemistry? That's how many subunits there are in a polymer. It's hundreds.
Of course.
And how many parsecs did it take the Millennium Falcon to make the Kessel run?
All right, I'm bluffing. All right, guys, you caught me.
It's okay. Oh my gosh. Okay, so Jay Strovey, our producer, says the worst of the bonds. Kilodalton, worst James Bond ever. Okay, let's regroup here, team. All right, producer Jay, if you would, let's play our last read of the night before we lose complete control of the show. And we'll go to our last read, and then we'll tackle some last questions before we wrap up. Thanks to our show sponsors, RealAg Radio, the Canola School, and Machinery Update. Don't miss out on any of the content we publish. Featuring equipment announcements and coverage from machinery shows, the Machinery Update is the newsletter for anyone interested in the latest technical advancements in agriculture. Visit realagriculture.com/subscribe to sign up. In fairness, Timothy Dalton was a pretty good Bond. Okay, so let's 12 parsecs, by the way, apparently. Oh, and someone requested a lightsaber battle between the two of you. Unfortunately, you're not in the same room. So if next time you're in the same room, if somebody could manage that, thank you. Yeah, okay. We'll put that on the, is he wearing pants? Okay.
Where's yours, Tom?
Don't take this the wrong way, but that's a very small lightsaber.
I'm bringing a knife. I'm bringing a knife to a lightsaber tonight.
A knife to a lightsaber. Okay. All right, gentlemen. There was a question. Okay, just quickly, because now for Ontario, we are talking about harvesting our wheat, which is full of dawn. Everybody get out there and scout. But for Western Canada, of course, we are either in the thick potentially of heading or they're approaching. So Tom, when it comes to fusarium head blight targeting, we did talk about we're targeting that very small upright head that we're trying to get contact with. Do you have a favorite nozzle for fusarium head blight applications?
I don't know. I mean, but let's remember the principles. For fusarium, this
Okay.
is the one example where a double nozzle or an angled nozzle has proven dividends. If you're going to
Okay.
angle it forward,
Right.
that has the greatest benefit.
Okay.
And if you can twin it and angle forward and backward, you get another benefit from angling it backwards. The question I've been getting, I got it twice already in the
Yep.
last 7 days, is should I put more flow through the front or the rear nozzle? That's kind of the thing. So
Okay.
the principle of the matter is that the front nozzle does the heavy lifting. It deposits more of its
Right.
spray. So if they're equal, you're going to see more on the side of the weed head that is targeted by the front nozzle. So if you want to improve the overall amount of spray on the wheat head, you should put more through the front nozzle because it does the heavy lifting. At the price, though, at the cost of having uniform distribution, because the rear nozzle actually is the one that needs the help. So then if you put more liquid through the rear nozzle, you'll get better deposition on that side of the head and therefore get
Right.
more uniformity. Now, remember, I said earlier, and we all know that the fungicides that are targeting fusarium head blight are only locally systemic. They don't
Right.
leave the gloom that they're landing on. They don't translocate to the other side of the head. They move maybe within the gloom or they're within that part of the head, but they don't leave the head. So you really do have to target the side. So I kind of think in some ways, adding more to the rearward facing nozzle is probably a greater benefit.
What about
I
the
would like
angle,
to.
Tom? Do we want a steeper
Yeah.
angle back there? Do we want them symmetrical?
This.
It was actually work done by Shaftsma, Hooker, Spicer
Spicer.
et al. Right in the
Yeah.
90s. That said that the steeper angle was so much better, and they actually went to that flood jet and almost made it come out horizontal, almost like
Yeah.
came out almost
They had
straight
to
down.
drop them below the boom. They were
Yeah.
smacking the equipment itself. What about corn? Or what are we doing in corn, Tom?
What
What's
are we doing?
corn?
Oh, that's what I
What's
thought
corn?
you would say.
The corn isn't grown here, so it doesn't exist for me.
I
Tell
know.
me about
I know.
corn.
I'm
What do you?
inserting myself in here, Lyndsey. So the
You may.
principal, Tom, I'm going to. I have a lightsaber. He's only got a knife and a little one, smaller than mine.
Yep. Okay. Carrying on. Corn.
The reason Tom wants those on angles is because the spray proceeds on the same angle that it was fired, right? So it's going to pass up one side of the wheat and down the other. Unless it's windy, then it's going to land on the windward side. Let's not fool ourselves. Corn also needs fungicide, and even though it's kind of all over the place right now, we should be thinking about it. And how are we going to do that? We can rain spray down from above, through the tassels and through the leaves, hoping that some of it is going to land on the upward-facing surfaces on the primary, on the silks and even on the leaves around the corn, around the ear. Or we could do it differently. We can insert the nozzle into the corn and spray sideways. So we've been doing this for a few years now, and I think we've slowly led a few horses to water on this to consider how this works. We demonstrated this with Hooker and Tenuta when we looked at drop hoses in general. They were amazing how complete the coverage was. And then we kind of dialed in on one system in particular, and I'm not selling them, so I'm not going to name it, but it is cheap and effective, and we've seen it pay for itself in 250 acres, and that is super appealing. The only hassle with this system is it's new, and nobody likes new. And the custom applicators are a little nervous about it because, especially this year, corn is all different heights and you've only got the one sprayer, and these things are permanent. So that is to say, when you set the nozzle on the drop, it doesn't move.
It doesn't move.
So if you don't have some play in your boom to kind of aim that within the canopy, you're out of luck. But I think we're coming around to new ways of doing that too. This is called a directed application, aiming from within. It would
So,
be
Jason, do you need nozzle spacing that's equivalent or some multiple of your row spacing for this to work?
We fiddled with this. So 30-inch corn means you're dropping these things in the alleys on 30 inches. 20-inch corn, we've snagged a few, but we're looking into a way to do that better. The real trick isn't that we're dropping them in every alley. The real trick is what is the spacing of the two nozzle bodies themselves. So we fiddled with this, and we've kind of turned a horizontal boom on its side, really. Potentially we have 100% overlap based on that spacing, and then we've moved them up slightly because spray falls, and you're not going to miss anything aiming down. Nevertheless, I continue to use pantomime here. The flat fan is aiming up and it's aiming down, so it's a virtual car wash in there. You're not going to miss. I think it gives us the best chance of success if your timing is right.
It makes me think of songs at the car wash.
Everything does.
Everything does. Everything can be brought back to some sort of song. But it is a question, Jason, and I'm interested to see where this goes and the adoption rates of these sorts of things, because like this year, if we're looking at these cornfields that look amazing, let's just look at those. They're incredibly tall, and if you're targeting, let's say, the silks for gibberella protection, that's a lot of canopy to have to get through to get there to actually target those silks. So I like how we're thinking getting down into said canopy and angling where we're going to put things.
We've been doing it in horticulture forever. Vertical booms, directed applications, drop hoses, they cut their teeth in horticultural crops. And the principle is exactly the same for this conveniently vertical field crop.
Right.
It's just a no-brainer.
Doesn't mean it's easy to adopt, though, Jason.
No, change is hard, and I get that, and it'll take 7 years for people to kind of pick up on it. There are no real detractors. There are just people that are waiting to see over a few years, and that's perfectly fair. We're in our 4th year of trials now, and we have a number of other operators that are in their 3rd year, and we leave unsprayed checks, and it looks sharp.
Good. Okay, so we'll keep watching. Mr. Vote says NDSU for fusarium head blight for wheat recommends 30 degrees from the center on the front and 70 degrees on the back facing. Tom, do you agree or disagree? Are you going to have a smackdown with NDSU right here, right now? Or does that sound okay?
NDSU have to be given tremendous credit. You know, I grew up not far from where Jason lives, and we looked to NDSU to get going on fusarium head blight control. They did the initial work on double nozzles. They brought it up to Manitoba, and I always looked to them for that. If they say 30-70, I'm going to be behind them. We don't have data that contradicts. We did do some asymmetric angling work ourselves. We did that in the lab. It's difficult to show those more subtle effects. You know, when you're looking for another 5 or 10%, that's hard to see in the field. But the principle of it is really sound. Let's face it, the forward-facing nozzle, because that sprayer is moving forwards, doesn't need a strong attack angle. Right. The rear-facing nozzle does. And that's the whole point that Jason's trying to make here. And I think NDSU has probably done some work on it. We did some 30-70 work as well once in the lab, and we saw not a huge benefit. But you know what? Like when it's fusarium, what have you got here? You've got an almost unwinnable situation, and everything you can do to benefit the spray's performance, you should be doing, even if it's a 5%er. You know, everything else is stacked against you.
Gibberella in corn is the same bloody thing. We've seen coverage that was absolutely stupendous and had less control than our unsprayed check. If one bit of that gets through and someone samples and they happen to get that hot spot, whether you mixed it or not, we cannot seem to correlate the method of application and the timing of application with Gib. It's baffling. Now, obviously, we know within a certain threshold when you should be out there. But if it gets you, it gets you.
Yeah, and it is the same pathogen. Like it is.
Yeah, and our products are suppressant. Right? Like they're not considered a control.
Yes.
So you're using Tom's little paring knife here.
Not a lightsaber. And yes, and this is this is a key point as well as, and Jason, you've alluded to it, the timing is just so critical.
Absolutely.
In that there's no curative effects. The products aren't going to move far, and the disease, if it's allowed to grow and spread, will just take off. So
when it's there, it's there.
Yeah, when it's there, it's there. It is just really difficult. And I mean, the conditions, and we'll see as this wheat crop continues to come off, when we've got, some heat, not too hot, but some heat and humidity, diseases just love to take off. So let's protect that corn crop as well here in Ontario, and that wheat crop out west. We are out of time. I know that went very quickly, and we've established a new James Bond, which is great. I also wanted to point out that glooms is spelled, it's not GLOOM, it's GLUME. This is very important. Words are important, according to me. And that Tom brings a knife to a lightsaber fight.
And I'm the new James Bond villain.
And you're the new villain. Yeah, you don't have a catch,
Lord
but we'll
Dalton.
find
No, Dr. Wolf, I expect you to die.
Oh, goodness. Okay. So, to everyone who joined us, of course, I know it's a busy time of year, so thank you for that. I anticipate in the coming days we'll get lots of questions that come in, of course, as people watch this on YouTube and pick it up in the emails, etc. And any questions, of course, send them in, and I will connect you to Tom or to Jason.
Or
And
go to
thank you
Sprayers
both.
101, right?
Or, yes, I was going to say, there
I'm
happens
sure
to
you
be
are.
an amazing site that these two gentlemen feature prominently in. Or if you would also like to see ridiculous videos of the spray myths, also on Sprayers 101 and Real Agriculture's YouTube channel, go check them out. They are well worth the time. Make some popcorn, sit down, just check out all of it. It's amazing and a lot of fun. So there you go. All right, Tom, thank you and good luck. I can only imagine how many field days you plan to be at in the next few weeks. So there you go. Jason, I suspect you'll be doing more driving in sprayers, and I would like to hear more about it. So please share.
You should say good luck to the operators that have to tolerate me for 12 hours at a go.
It helps pass the time. All right. Thank you both for joining me. And of course, thank you everyone else for following along and for your great questions. We really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll be back with another episode of The Agronomist next week, 8 p.m. Eastern. Cheers, everybody.